Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Today we're going to take a look at something less monstrous and journey to the lands of Kislev, as we really haven't discussed their possible playstyle. Now as always, my sources for these types of videos are of course the lore, any addition that they might have been playable on the tabletop, and this time we're also going to be looking at War Master. So without further ado, let's begin. Kislev is one of the races in Total War Warhammer 3 which many people can't wait to play, and with good reason. They are another human nation, yes, but they are actually quite unique. There is, however, a common misconception that Kislev will play very similar to the Empire, and it's understandable that people believe this, especially since Kislev really didn't have that much of a fleshed out roster, at least on Warhammer Fantasy Tabletop. Yet as we go through their individual unit styles, we'll see some differences here. First, let's start off with the infantry. So Kislevite infantry did vary quite a bit in terms of lore. You have to keep in mind here for all parts of this video that there are actually two different types of humans living within Kislev, the Ungors and the Gospodars. Both of them are quite different but form one united nation. Infantry-wise, their units would vary quite drastically. You could have some lightly armored but very potent infantry. These were very commonly seen with axes and bows, being able to use two different types of weapons. Or of course a more heavily armoured regimental type unit, often with great weapons such as great axes or maybe even a halberd. These are the most common types of weaponry, as of course Kislev is geared to fight against chaos. And these types of weapons are best suited against chaos. These units can also use ranged weapons too in most cases, but I'm assuming that, of course, to fill out the roster a little bit more, they might have some different variants. Though that being said, the Corsairs, which are the light skirmishing infantry with axes and bows, I'd like them to stay the same, very similar in a sense to the Kislevite version of the High Lothan Sea Guard. Now it's expected that these units themselves would move fairly quickly across the battlefield. It's expected because, well, they come from Kislev. This is a land which is extremely dangerous. And this will also be seen across all of their roster. So now let's move on to the Cavalry, which once again has a very similar theme to the infantry. Cavalry itself is divided between light and heavy once again. Fast-moving Ungol horse archers, which are your skirmishing cav. Commonly seen with swords or spears, but always seen with a bow. These units are here to harass your enemy, so if you're used to skirmishing based light cav, like for example the Empire Pistoliers, think of them in the same way, but more willing to get up front to do damage. Now of course, there is a heavy cavalry feature for Kislev which we can expect to be quite potent. We know of units such as the Winged Lancers, which of course are a Lancer unit, but also Bear Cavalry, which is confirmed to be included in Total War Warhammer 3. Both would essentially have the same battlefield role, but work in a very different sense. Of course, I'm talking about them being line breakers. Lancers or even Monstrous Cav are great to actually smash down enemy lines. It can be assumed that even the Bear Cavalry would be decently fast, but obviously it depends on what you want to use them for. The Lancers themselves are quite good for going around and flanking your enemy, but Bears themselves might be the best to just charge straight in. I'm assuming if they go into the deeper lore of Kislev, we'll most likely get a bear unit without riders too, and that kind of works out as it gives a monstrous unit to the Kislevites, which would be kind of needed. They'd be a bit weaker than the variant with riders, but it's always good to have some options, especially if you want to go full bear, and I'm assuming that a bunch of people watching this video right now will want to go full bear. That pretty much covers the most basic form which everyone expects from Kislev. There's not too much of a point covering range, as we've already covered that in the infantry section more or less. What we're expecting is bows and gunpowder, and yes, while that might seem very common, bear in mind that humans will very much fight in the same way. Now we look towards artillery, and yes, Kislev do have access to artillery. We know from lore that Kislev has a lot of different types of artillery, and this is what will draw the parallel to the Empire the most, I'd say. War wagons were actually a common unit in their War master armies, and you really can't have a defensive or offensive line without some form of siege weaponry such as cannons. Everything you know in terms of cannons from the Empire is exactly what we can expect from Kislev. While this might not be the most exciting thing, bear in mind that a lot of humans will act the same way. Talia, Estalia and the Border Princes all have access to gunpowder based siege weaponry too. And finally, of course, Kislev will have a strong emphasis on magic like, well, most of the races in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. But what separates them from the other races is the use of two unique laws of magic, the Law of Ice and the Law of Hags. Both of them work very differently. You see, the Law of Ice is focused around terrain manipulation and damage, summoning terrain to block out your enemy's line of sight or force them to move to other locations, whilst also conjuring very powerful blizzards to take them out. While the Law of Hags is very balanced in a sense, but focusing around buffing up your own troops or cursing your enemies with loads of different debuffs. The idea of two possible laws of magic also kinda works really well if you like to theme your armies. If you want armies of Gospodars, then the Law of Ice works for you, but if you want armies of Ungls, then the Law of Hags is there for you too. The thing with Kislev, as I stated before, is that there are two unique different cultures, and that in theory, if it's translated well into Total War Warhammer, could provide a different type of playstyle depending on your army, unless you try to mix and match. If you mix and match a roster, you'll very much play very similar to that of the Empire, but if you go with 4 Ungls, then you're focusing around skirmishing based forces. However, if you go for Gospodar, then it can be assumed that you'll be playing in a very similar sense to that of Bretonnia, a strong heavy cavalry focus, but also with some foot knights too, so you could more or less work in a knightly order sense. I'm imagining that if Creative Assembly want to follow around the law, then of course it should be possible to play as all 3 styles. Mixed armies, mono Ungol and mono Gospodar. I think that would actually be the best way to go about it, though I'm not imagining very large armies if you're going on a full focus. But what do you guys think about this possibility? Of course, I'm going mostly by lore here. This lore itself is quite old, and we are aware that Games Workshop are reworking Kislev, but I believe that the basic framework is going to stay exactly the same, as of course, while Warhammer Fantasy has been discontinued, it's also kinda spiritually lived on through Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and that's not really changed Kislev one bit, barring a few things here and there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.